Hi, this is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about gold versus Bitcoin. Which one is better? If you're interested in Bitcoin, gold stocks, or just want to see what I'm trading during this financial crisis or at any time, be sure to hit that subscribe button right now. So I should begin by saying I like both gold and Bitcoin. I think they're both going to do really well in the 2020s. And the reason for that is just this background of central bank money printing. So we know that the central bank is printing a lot of new money to buy assets and to prop up asset prices during the coronavirus problems. They're expanding their balance sheet, and the only way they can do this is by creating new money. Right now, the Federal Reserve, the assets they hold on their balance sheet as a percentage of GDP is at an all-time new high here. It's just really off the charts. Now, I should say, if you don't know anything about Bitcoin, you can check out my Bitcoin for Beginners video, which I'll link to below. But assuming you understand Bitcoin and you understand gold, which do I think will perform better as a hedge, an inflation hedge, and a hedge against all this money printing that's currently happening at the Federal Reserve, as well as all the other central banks around the world? So let's first talk about which has been around for longer. This is quite obvious, but it does bear repeating. Gold has been used in human culture since at least 3000 BC. It was used in Egypt, obviously, and prized by the pharaohs, and probably used much earlier for ornamental and trade purposes. Bitcoin was invented in 2008. Unknown inventor. His name is Satoshi Nakamoto, which is almost certainly a pseudonym. It could be a he or she or they, but he's been anonymous ever since then, he or she, and may even no longer be alive. But Bitcoin was basically invented in 2008, 5,000 years after gold, and it was first deployed. The software started running in 2009. So gold does have this history behind it. And I think that is the strongest argument in favor of gold. Now, Bitcoin is a new technology. Bitcoin could definitely go to zero. Gold will definitely not go to zero. There's certain lower bounds, such as the cost of production, etc., the marginal cost of production. But on the other hand, Bitcoin can go up a lot more than gold. So it has sort of some optionality. It's a little bit like a call option. Now, the other thing about technology is sometimes new technology is better than old technology. In fact, in almost all cases, it is. So gold was a very good technology of its time as a form of money. Bitcoin, I would argue, and I'll argue in this video, is a much better form of money for multiple reasons. And we can see the evolution of technology. If you look at something as simple as the printing press, invented in 1440, no one wants to go back to the printing press, though. We now have digital printing, digital publishing, email, texting, etc., which has lowered the cost of sending information and storing information to virtually zero. It doesn't cost you anything to send an email or send a text or publish something online. The costs are really minimal. So I would argue this is an example of where a newer technology that builds on the idea of the printing press is transformed into a digital printing press and is actually a better technology that's more widely embraced. Paper is very quickly disappearing. Paper books, everyone's reading on Kindle, etc., etc. So there are examples where technology makes something better. Now, the other argument against Bitcoin is that it is very volatile. There are other arguments against Bitcoin, like can it be banned by governments, etc. I'll link to some of those videos below. But one thing I would say is that Bitcoin is much more volatile than gold. Bitcoin can easily move up 20% in a day, down 20, 40, 50% in a day. But what we have noticed is it's constantly making higher highs and higher lows. And the thing about Bitcoin, if it's going to go up a lot, which I think it is, and I should say right here, I do discuss that in that Bitcoin for Beginners video, I think Bitcoin will be trading above 100,000 probably this summer of 2021, but certainly by the end of the year 2021. And then using the model, which I discussed in that video, I think it'll be at $300,000 per Bitcoin by 2024 and $3 million per Bitcoin by 2028. You can read more about that model, which I talk about in the video that I link. So Bitcoin is volatile, and what that means is you need to size it much smaller than you would a different investment. So gold, gold moves 1 or 2% a day. Those would be big. A 5% move in gold would be quite large. Bitcoin is more volatile. Bitcoin has more downside potential than gold, but also a lot more upside potential. And so I would argue that when a technology is new, or when an asset class is new, it's more volatile. So for example, when Microsoft and Amazon were just getting started as companies, their stocks, when they're just recently public, their stocks were extremely, extremely volatile. Amazon went down something like 90% from 2000 to 2002. But what happens is new technologies, new assets, new stocks are always very volatile. And then as they mature and become more widely accepted and their future becomes more certain, the volatility goes down. But if you wait to invest in an asset class until the volatility is gone, you'll miss out on the vast amount of appreciation. Now Amazon and Apple, Google, Microsoft, these companies are not nearly as volatile, but the real appreciation is already over. You're not going to have these stocks go up 10,000% in the next decade as they have over the last 1 or 2 decades. So the next thing about gold versus Bitcoin is infinitely, well, I shouldn't say infinitely divisible, but it's easy to divide it into small pieces. 1 Bitcoin is equal to 100 million Satoshis. As I'm recording this, Bitcoin's currently about $7,500 US dollars per Bitcoin. And so it's quite possible to divide it into very small pieces. It's easy to buy 50 cents or $1 worth of Bitcoin. Gold is a lot more problematic. Now, you can obviously, right now it's difficult to buy things using Bitcoin or using gold. You can't go buy groceries with gold. You can't buy Bitcoin. You can't buy most products using Bitcoin. You can't take it to your local grocery store. What you can do for each of them is you convert them to fiat money. You convert your gold to dollars. You convert your Bitcoin to dollars, and you can shop with it. Obviously, there are more and more e-commerce stores that accept Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is very easy to send online as we'll talk about, which is another advantage. But right here, I just want to emphasize how it's divisible very easily into small pieces. And these small pieces represent, I think if I do the math right, less than a penny. Whereas gold, if you have a brick of gold, it's much more difficult to shave off a small piece to buy a cup of coffee, for example. And so as a money technology, as a medium of exchange, gold is a little more awkward. So let's say you have $500,000 worth of gold. You'd like to, it's just a big brick. You'd like to sell 10% of it. It's actually quite difficult to cut off the right piece, and then you have to have it weighed and assayed, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next thing. Next, assaying gold. Assaying gold means you basically take a sample and you do chemical tests on it to make sure that it is real gold and that it has the correct purity. This is a very expensive process. It's a specialized process. You have to know what you're doing. I don't know exactly how it's done, but it looks like it can cost $300 per sample for assay charges, and then it's hundreds of dollars to verify whether what you have is true gold. And so if, for example, you're trying to store millions of dollars in gold, you have to be very careful and make sure, for example, the gold bars aren't hollow or that they don't have lead in the middle. These are old tricks. Now, Bitcoin is very easy to value and to verify that it's real. I'm not going to go into that here, but I'll put some links. It's very easy to check online that your Bitcoin is real and that it is on the blockchain. And it's basically free to check. Whereas gold, you have to go to a special gold assayer. You have to pay a lot of money, and you have to do this every time you exchange gold, which is very difficult. Bitcoin makes this much more seamless. So Bitcoin definitely wins the verification quality comparison. Next, Bitcoin is very easy to move over borders, to move over long distances. If, for example, you're a wealthy Chinese businessman, you want to take some money out of China, you can put it into Bitcoin and move it over the border, send it anywhere in the world. You can send it, for example, it's used for remittances. American workers or immigrant workers who work in the U.S. and want to send money back to their family in, let's say, Mexico or South America or Africa. It's quite easy to send Bitcoin over long distances. Obviously, much more difficult to do this with gold. Now, what this means, obviously, Bitcoin can be used for illegal purposes. It can be used by drug dealers. It can be used by anyone. And so it's sort of agnostic. But the one thing I would point out is that the U.S. dollar is probably the number one currency used by drug dealers, money launderers, people conducting illegal activities. But being able to send, you would expect in the internet age, in the era of zeros and ones, that money would be easy to send. If I want to send a wire transfer to someone in China or in Russia, it's a multi-day process, and it'll cost maybe a couple $100, no matter how much I'm going to send, and it might take 3 or 4 days to get there. The current systems for moving money around the world are very, very primitive. Now, when a country runs into trouble and the citizens want to get their money out of the local currency, Bitcoin is the really easy way to do that. We can see right now, for example, there's the peg that the Lebanese currency has with the dollar looks like it's breaking, and as a result, there are a lot of people in Lebanon trying to get their money into US dollars, into Bitcoin, into anything that they can to get it out of the money and to get it out of the country, and or to preserve its purchasing power. If the currency is crashing, you don't want to be holding that currency. As a result, right now as I speak in the US, Bitcoin is trading for about $7,500 per Bitcoin. In Lebanon, it's trading at $15,000. So it's a very flexible currency. It will trade based on supply and demand wherever it is. And there's an arbitrage here, obviously. If you know how to do it, you can buy Bitcoin in the US for $7,500. And if you have contacts in Lebanon, you can turn around and sell those Bitcoin at basically double the price for a $7,500 profit. So Bitcoin is very good. It's good for moving money over long distances. It's also, as we discussed, it's good for global remittances, increasingly being used, for example, by the people in Venezuela or by Americans who want to send money to relatives in Venezuela. Bitcoin is also nice because it cannot be censored. You can, if you work in certain industries or you have a certain reputation, banks may refuse to do business with you. And for example, right now in Colorado in the cannabis industry, because marijuana is still illegal at the federal level, banks can't have anything to do with it. And so they all these cannabis shops rely on cash. And so the problem is, if you want to express yourself in a certain way or do a certain behavior that the government doesn't like, they can somewhat control your behavior by controlling the money. The nice thing about Bitcoin is it cannot be censored. You can use Bitcoin to express diverse political views, and as such, it's an expression of free speech. You could send Bitcoin, for example, to fund political leaders in another country who are trying to overthrow the existing tyrannical government, etc. Now, the other use of Bitcoin, obviously, and the reason it becomes very important in this era, is that all the big social media companies have a lot of power and they censor whatever they don't like. So Twitter removing accounts in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Unclear exactly the details of this. Is it because they're criticizing the Egyptian and Saudi Arabian government? Hard to know why Twitter should have a problem with that or would have a dog in that fight. YouTube as well has been banning content that contradicts the WHO, the World Health Organization's COVID-19 advice. Again, this is very problematic simply because we had the WHO giving a lot of really bad advice early on in the pandemic. In fact, they refused to call it a pandemic for a while. We have prominent medical professionals saying you shouldn't wear face masks because they actually increase the risk of infection. And if you were comparing the WHO's notes on COVID versus what was happening on coronavirus Twitter, people on Twitter knew what was happening much, much better. You had a lot of doctors on there. You had a lot of biologists and virologists. And so in this era where you have so much control in the hands of both governments and private companies like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Bitcoin is very useful. Obviously, you cannot, it's much more difficult to exercise your rights of free speech using gold. Here's another headline: coronavirus is spreading, but WHO says it's not a global emergency. WHO very, very far behind everyone else, especially very smart people like Nassim Taleb on Twitter, etc. So in this environment of increasing censorship of free speech, where we're forced to listen to people who really did a very bad job of the federal government wasn't prepared for this, the WHO wasn't prepared, state and local governments were not prepared, etc. So there's really no reason there should be, especially in the United States. I know if you live in another country, this emphasis on free speech might not make as much sense, but this is certainly in the U.S. Constitution, etc. And one form of free speech is being able to move money around. If you have no livelihood, if you can't express if you have certain views that the establishment doesn't like for whatever reason, and these could be views on the far right or they could be views on the far left, it's important to be able to have a source of income and fund yourself. And this is the role that Bitcoin and other forms of non-government money can play in supporting free speech. Obviously, gold much more difficult to transport, for example. Now, where's gold held? This is another problematic thing. A lot of people don't know this, but most of the world's gold is stored in vaults in central bank basements. Now, this is problematic, especially if you don't like central bankers. Like, I don't like central bankers. I don't like people who debase the currency. I don't like people who bail out Wall Street and hedge funds, and then just send $1,000 to the regular person. I don't like these people, and as such, I want to have as little to do with them as possible. The problem with gold is you're really at the mercy of these people who are storing a lot of it. They can dump it on the market. They can make it illegal and confiscate it. It's much easier to confiscate gold, and obviously much more difficult to hide it and move it around than it is to do the same with Bitcoin. Turns out the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is one of the largest, maybe the largest gold repository in the world. Obviously a lot of money at Fort Knox, etc. But even a lot of privately stored gold, as far as I understand it, can be stored at banks or central banks. So if you're not a fan of the current sort of crony capitalism, kleptocracy system, this is a problem with gold. If you buy the GLD, the gold ETF, you have a similar problem where you don't really know where your gold is. You don't know if the custodian is reliable, and so these are all problems that gold bugs have to deal with. I still think that gold goes up in price, that the central bank can't manipulate the price forever, but it's even harder for the central bank to manipulate the price of Bitcoin. So here's some pictures of Fort Knox and where most of the world's gold is stored in vaults in the U.S., controlled by the central banks or by the banks. Again, if you're not a fan of central banks, it can be problematic having most of your currency held by them. Now, who holds Bitcoin? Bitcoin, I like it because it's held by more libertarian types. I tend to lean in that direction, even though I'm not a libertarian. It's held by entrepreneurs. It's held by very smart cryptographers and mathematicians like Satoshi, who invented Bitcoin, the Winklevoss brothers, entrepreneurs, businessmen, venture capitalists, technologists. This is, in my opinion, a much more interesting, smarter group of people than central bankers. And give me these people any day. Now, obviously, there are going to be inequalities of wealth when it comes to Bitcoin. Some of these early holders are really going to be extremely wealthy. Satoshi Nakamoto will probably be the first trillionaire, and it'll be very weird seeing him at the head of at the top of the Forbes list when we don't even know who he is or whether he's still alive. But if Bitcoin does what I think it's going to do, he's going to be extremely wealthy. The good news is that anyone can still get in Bitcoin. $7,500 for a Bitcoin, in my opinion, going to 100,000 fairly soon, and then going into the millions of dollars. So if you want to be a multimillionaire, you somehow cobble together $7,500 today, and you will get there. You'll be ahead of 99% of the world's population. Not investment advice, but I should say that I own a lot of Bitcoin. Now, another point in the gold versus Bitcoin debate is storing gold. We talked a little bit about this earlier in the video. If you have a lot of gold in your house, it becomes sort of a honeypot for criminals. I don't have any gold in my house. I don't have any Bitcoin in my house, so please don't come to where I live. But gold is difficult to move. It's expensive to move. It's expensive to insure, and it's hard to store. You can have some in your basement. Maybe your basement gets flooded. Maybe there's a tornado. Maybe people repeatedly try to break in. And so storing gold is much more problematic than storing Bitcoin, which can be stored on hardware devices like the Trezor, which I'm a big fan of. I'm not affiliated with them or anything, though I do have some various hardware wallets. You can also store your Bitcoin using multi-sig, multi-signature across a bunch of different hardware wallets. And the other neat thing, you can actually store your Bitcoin in what's called a brain wallet. You can store it in your head simply by memorizing a seed phrase. This is a very nice thing to have if you have to leave the country for some reason, if you have to be mobile. The downside with a brain wallet storing your Bitcoin is if you get hit on the head or hit by a car or something, you want to make sure that other people, maybe your spouse or children, know your seed phrase, etc. So Bitcoin is essentially free to store. You can store it on a piece of paper or a metal plate, on a hardware wallet, or you can even store it in your brain, in your mind. Now, another point in the gold versus Bitcoin debate is gold has functioned as a form of money because it has a very high stock to flow. Currently, gold has a stock to flow of about 62, which means it would take 62 years at current mining production to replicate all the gold that's currently above ground in jewelry and in central bank vaults. Gold is expensive to extract. There's not a lot of it that's easy to get to. I think there's quite a bit in the Earth's core or deep below the Earth, but it's obviously very expensive to extract. But the problem with gold is it's actually fairly common in the solar system. And there are a lot of scientists, for example, worried now about this arms race going to asteroids and moons and other planets to mine gold. And there's some proposals to try to sort of create wilderness, the equivalent of national parks or wilderness areas in the solar system, so that all the planets don't just become filled with dirty mining equipment and people fighting, countries fighting wars on other planets. So gold is actually not that scarce. What makes money good is that it is scarce. If you can just print money like this guy does, and this is what's happening with the US dollar, we actually had Khashoggi go on 60 Minutes and say, we have infinite dollars, we have infinite cash, we have infinite US dollars that we can print. This is what makes the dollar go down over time. So you definitely don't want to own, this is why you want to own something that's scarce, maybe like a Picasso, a house on the beach, or if you're not that wealthy, you can own Bitcoin or gold, which is a good store of value. But gold is much less scarce than Bitcoin. Gold has a stock to flow of 62. In a couple of years, Bitcoin is going to have a stock to flow of 100, and it's just going to go up from there. There are only 21 million Bitcoin in existence, and this is built hardwired into the code. And right now, the current money supply for Bitcoin, there have been about 18.3 million coins mined. Satoshi Nakamoto has 1 million of them. Many of these coins have been lost, but this is a very, very scarce asset. 87% have already been mined. In a few years, we'll be up to 90 or 95%. So this is much more scarce than gold. If you own gold, you actually have to worry about the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezoses of the world trying to send out probes and mining equipment to asteroids, for example, to bring more gold home. This is a funny headline, I thought, simply pointing out that if you brought all the gold from this asteroid back to Earth, there's enough gold there that would make everyone on Earth a billionaire. But what this fails to point out is that would destroy the scarcity of gold, and so the value of gold would plummet, and it would no longer be a good form of money. So if you look from a really big perspective of the next 100 years, gold is not scarce. Bitcoin is very scarce. Only 21 million coins. If you own 21 Bitcoin, you're in a very elite club of just 1 million people among 7 or 8 billion human beings. Now, what is the value of all the existing gold? According to this Wikipedia article, as of 2019, which is the most recent data we have, all the gold ever mined, which is basically still in existence, it's in vaults, it's in jewelry, it's in museums, 190,040 metric tons of gold. Now I did a quick calculation. I convert the 190,000 metric tons into ounces, and currently gold is trading at $1,745 an ounce. It's up quite sharply this year. I think it's up 10 or 15%. That gives you a total market cap, or total value of all the gold in the world at 11.7 trillion. So this is a fairly big market, even if a lot of money flows into it. I think the US GDP right now is about 20 trillion. So we're talking big numbers here when you start talking trillions. This is a big market that requires a lot of money flowing into it to move it. And by contrast, Bitcoin's market cap is 138 billion, not trillion. So the same amount of money flowing into Bitcoin, or even a fraction of the same amount of money, will have a much bigger impact. This is the same reason that a small cap stock has the potential to go up much more than a large cap or mega cap stock. And Bitcoin is designed in such a way that these numbers can get much bigger. Bitcoin could certainly, if it succeeds, have the same size market cap as gold. And if Bitcoin were to have the same market cap as gold, 11.7 trillion, that comes out to approximately $550,000 per Bitcoin. Again, Bitcoin trading right now at 7,500. So this shows you the upside if Bitcoin is adopted. Bitcoin market cap right now 139 billion versus gold's market cap of 12 trillion. Finally, I would add sort of the generational demographics thing. Actually, before I discuss that, we'll talk about institutional money flows. Institutions are waking up to Bitcoin. There have been some big flows into Bitcoin from institutional investors over the past couple years, and certainly accelerating in the last, certainly accelerated in 2020. And the sort of paradoxical thing is that the bigger Bitcoin's market cap gets, the more money these institutional investors will be able to deploy. When something has a market cap of 138 billion, this is much less than the market cap of even a private a company like Coke, or I think Coke must be 200, 300 billion, or Home Depot, or one of these companies. Apple, of course, is in the trillions, above $1 trillion, Amazon above $1 trillion, Microsoft above $1 trillion market cap, etc. But as Bitcoin's price goes up and the market cap goes up, these institutional investors are going to have a much easier time deploying capital. And you can see here they're putting money into Bitcoin, Ethereum, which I don't like, but what can you say? Maybe it goes up, maybe it doesn't. But the more money goes into Bitcoin, the more money will be able to go into Bitcoin. That's what makes it so exciting as sort of an emerging new asset class. And once this market cap gets above $1 trillion, as I think it will later this year, or certainly next year, all of a sudden $1 trillion market cap, a lot more people, hedge funds, pensions, etc., high net worth individuals will be able to invest in it. Finally, we have the generational thing. And the younger generations, I'm Gen X, so I'm sort of sandwiched in the middle here between all these very big generations. But I would say that millennials and Gen Z, Zoomers, are much more interested in digital assets. And as the scarcest digital asset out there, Bitcoin is really a natural fit for people who've grown up on Snapchat and Instagram and using online payment like PayPal and Venmo, etc. I would say that Gen X is we're sort of straddling the gold era and the Bitcoin era. Most of the pushback against Bitcoin that I get on my YouTube channel is from baby boomers who are definitely much more into gold. So I would say just this process of generational change definitely is not in favor of Bitcoin, and not in favor of gold, I'm sorry, but much more in favor of digital currency that's easy to send, that's easy to receive, and that just sort of has the coolness factor. It's very hard to find any millennials or Gen Zs, Zoomers, who are interested in gold. I'm sure there are some, but all of these people, even my young kids, totally get Bitcoin. Gold is just not really on their radar at all. Now, if you want to see what I'm doing with Bitcoin and other cryptos, check out my course, follow my crypto investments, and you can check out all my courses on here. If you have some free time now, you're stuck at home, you're tired of binging on Netflix, learn to trade options like a pro, learn to trade futures, swing trade with options, and then my flagship course, learn to trade stocks like a pro. These are all great ways to get up to speed on the markets, as well as my bear market trading course, which has been working quite well in this market environment. Now, the good news is you don't have to choose between these courses. You can get unlimited access to all these courses for a monthly tuition. Now, normally, so if you want to check them out, you can click on the link, the description notes below. It will take you to this page. You can click on any of these boxes and see the list of lectures. And if you're interested, you can just scroll down to the bottom, click Get It Now. That will take you to this checkout page. And on this checkout page, I want to give you a special coupon code. Click here, YT99, as in YouTube 99. Click Update, and that will take the price down from $125 for 30 days access to just $99 for 30 days access. There's no long-term contracts or anything, so you can watch all the courses and cancel at any time. So check those out if you're interested. Make sure you hit that subscribe and like button if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks for watching.